On this episode of Big Sky Now, we discuss Week 13 where we saw Montana State win the Brawl of the Wild. We also discuss some other games and a surprising victory from Weber State. Next, we jump into some FCS Playoffs talk, and then we give our picks for the all-season awards in the Big Sky. I'd like to give a shout out to M&C Tires for sponsoring this podcast. Let's not waste any time and get right to it. Welcome back, everyone, to our weekly episode of Big Sky Now. I am your host, Luke Schmit. Today, I am joined by Daily Interlake Sports Editor Fritz Neighbor, Daily Interlake Sports Reporter Jon Allen, Coeur d'Alene Press Sports Editor Mark Nelke, and Columbia Basin Herald Sports Reporter Mike Maynard. Let's not waste any time, guys. I know why we're all here. We're here to discuss the Brawl of the Wild results, where we saw Montana State escape Montana as Justin Lamson and Caden Dowler were so impressive in the win, and I'm just going to jump it right to Fritz because he was at the game in the electric atmosphere, and would love to hear what you thought, Fritz.
Well, yeah, I thought Lamson played really well, and I thought the biggest point in the game came after Eli Gilman broke loose on his 52-yard run and cut the gap to 3, so it's 31-28. There's 6:59 left, and you think the Griz get a stop. They're in business, and they didn't get a stop. Cats were able to bleed all 6:59 off the clock. And, that's what the Griz used to do to people. They used to get a lead and get the ball back and just run out the clock and kind of demoralize people. So, Cats are impressive. I thought they looked better overall. When they needed 1 yard on 4th and 1, they got 2. When they needed 3rd and 5, they got 6. I thought that play coming out of 2-minute timeout, I kind of thought it was a read zone the way it looked. They faked a jet sweep to Taco Dowler. Tuliaupupu blitzed in and was all over it. And Lamson kept the ball and ran right past Peyton Wing for 6 yards in the first down. And at that point, I thought, well, that's it. They're cooked, meaning Griz. And they're going to be no longer unbeaten. Both teams applied a lot of pressure. And I know game situations dictate some of this, but as in MSU's defense. But I thought, the Griz threw 3 times to Michael Worth. He was starting 3 times, including one time when they probably shouldn't have thrown it. And that ended up being a pick 6 to Caden Dowler. And he had 3 carries out of the Wildcat. And I know he had a couple nice kickoff returns, but it felt like he was underused. Gilman had 15 carries. His 15th carry went for 52 yards in the score. Brooks Davis had a great game, and they went to him a lot. And I thought, even so, there was a couple of big weapons that were underutilized. And Cats were tough, and they ran the ball down the Grizzlies' throat there at the end and won the game.
The Cats are tough, Fritz, and like you said, I think they look like the better team. They controlled the line of scrimmage on offense and defense. I think Montana definitely had a tougher time running the ball compared to Montana State. And that was evident at the end of the game as they were able to take away the time. And, for such a back and forth game, I think Griz fans were a little stunned that Montana State was able to just bleed the clock and get out of there with the victory. So hats off to Montana State. They will go into the playoffs now as the 2 seed. And, the battle of the national championship will go through Bozeman. So definitely an impressive win and winners of the Big Sky. John, just want to hear your thoughts on the game. And, these 2 teams could play later. We'll talk about the FCS bracket after last week's games, but let's hear what you got, John.
Yeah, definitely a rematch could definitely be in the cards as we go. But once again, like kind of mentioned, we'll cross that bridge a little later and maybe when we get there as well. I think both teams did a good job kind of executing their strengths. The Montana offense was able to, figure out ways to get by this Montana State defense. They got 28 points on the board. In a game like that, sometimes you'd think it would be enough, but it just wasn't in that one. Meanwhile, the Bobcat defense, they did a good job of capitalizing when they could. The tip pass, Caden Dowler brings it back for a touchdown. Zach Cruz breaks through, blocks the field goal that could have ended up tying the game in the long run. So, I just feel like both teams kind of executed in ways that they needed to. Montana State, of course, executed a little bit better, and that's why they come out of there with a victory. And, that last drive is just impressive as heck, on the road, up by 3, bleeding off almost 7 minutes of clock, and not letting the home team with the home crowd be able to get that one chance and kind of fuel off the momentum. And they just took it all the way down, and that's why the trophy heads back to Bozeman.
Does head back to Bozeman. Mark, what were your thoughts on the game? Were you tuned in for a little bit, the full game? We want to hear what you think.
Yeah, I had it on as much as I could and was doing other things, but the parts that I saw was, kind of like you guys said, it was apparent Montana State was a little bit better team, a little better on offense, a little better on defense. Montana's advantage, Montana's a good team also, and Montana was playing at home, so I thought that was their advantage is, maybe they could do like what Fritz said, get a stop and get a score and win it at the end. They're actually ahead. They're ahead until that pick 6 put them behind the one by Dowler, and then that was kind of it. And so overall, just impressed with Montana State to be able to come into that environment and be good enough to win in Missoula. So that was my takeaway. And we might be talking about this game again in 3 weeks when they, if the seeds hold up and they play in Bozeman.
You're definitely right, Mark. I think, we could see a rematch, and that Dowler interception, I thought changed everything. As you said, Montana was up, not by a large amount, but, the momentum of that really swung heavily for the Bobcats. And Montana was able to get that late run with Gilman, but in the end, the home field advantage did not pay off, as if they were to play again, it will be in Bozeman. Mike, since this was kind of the first Cat Griz game you paid attention to, I want to hear what you think and your thoughts on the big rivalry.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to tune in live. I was covering some local high school playoff football, but to kind of come back and see some of the recaps and whatnot. One thing I really am liking from what I'm saying is the quarterback play. I know Ayat had one interception, but both quarterbacks were incredibly accurate. It's just a competitive game, and ultimately the better team was able to edge it out. I think, especially in a rivalry game, like this is what you love to see. So really cool to kind of get that experience and I think it'll be very interesting if they get to play each other again in the playoffs. I think what'll determine how I assess sort of who might come out the other side on that one is just how they go about against other opponents in the playoffs. But I think anybody in this matchup could win. So yeah, really, really competitive.
Yeah, and this brawl was one of the closer ones we've seen in the past. Usually the home team has been dominant, but this was such a great game. And, I think 4 or 5 plays go differently. It could have gone different for Montana. It didn't. So therefore, the Bobcats obviously get the win. But this was one of the best games I've watched this year. You could tell both sides wanted it. And the special teams all the way, to a blocked field goal that I thought was huge. For even though if you wouldn't have made it, that was just a momentum play for the Bobcats. And overall, they take the trophy back this year and have now won 2 in a row. And next year in Bozeman, the Grizzlies are due to hopefully not make it 3. But we got to jump to some more games here because we will talk about those teams more in the FCS playoffs. Mike, I'm going to jump it right back to you here. Let's talk a little Eastern Washington. They end the season with a loss against Cal Poly. So that was unfortunate. But what was kind of your takeaway this season? There were some ups and downs, but, I think they found a solid foundation going forward in the future.
Yeah, 100%. I honestly, a lot of the offensive weapons really kind of shined at moments. In that defense, in a lot of games were clutch when it mattered most. Obviously, finishing the season with a losing record, I still, even then, I don't think the record really indicates how good this team really could be. I just can't help but wonder, what if Jake Shackle kind of got his start earlier in the season, maybe right after they were, 3-1 in the conference, and maybe that he got hot at that time, So I definitely think it'll be interesting to see if he comes back and Nate Bell comes back and what they do in that position, or maybe they use them both in some way. I think if Nate Bell returns, there's no way you can have him on the roster and you don't use him in some fashion. He is incredible on his feet. So I'm very interested to see, if the offense could take a next step next season. But I think if you're ending the season as an Eagles fan, I would feel confident about the future. It seems pretty promising if they do all the right things and, just come out swinging next year.
Absolutely, Mike. I think, when it comes to August. That'd be one of the teams I think we'll be talking about is low on the radar, maybe to make one of a playoff performance or a playoff appearance, next year.
Mm-hmm.
If they continue with that, that rise and how they played this year, I think they did a lot better than we all predicted at the beginning of the season. I'm just going to sum up the Portland State, Northern Colorado game, and then we'll jump to John to talk some Northern Arizona. Northern Colorado ended their season with a victory at home, so that was good for the Bears. Snapped a 5-game losing streak with that win, and they also snapped a 5-game losing streak against Portland State. After the game, surprising though to some fans that Bruce Barnum was fired. Not that he was fired was surprising, but he was fired directly after the game. I believe there were reports that he was still on the tarmac, so no love lost there, I'd say. But he was fired and his staff was fired, so Portland State will be bringing in a new staff for next season. So that will be something to give us a talk about in the offseason. The Vikings finish at 1-11 overall and 1-7 in the Big Sky Conference. Just to get another stat for Barnum, in his 11 seasons at Portland State, he went 39-75 overall, 29-51 in the conference. And the only winning season they had was 2015. They went 9-3 and 6-2 in the Big Sky. So Big Sky Conference says goodbye to Barnum. I'm not sure where we will see him next, but that was kind of my notes on the game. Eric Gibson had 94 passing yards, and Portland State edged them out in total yards, but the classic Portland State team we've seen this season just isn't able to execute in the clutch plays. But we'll keep jumping here as that game wasn't really relevant towards the playoff picture, but we do want to talk about all the games. John, probably the most surprising result I saw Saturday was Northern Arizona losing to Weber State. Tough year for the Lumberjacks. I know you were a little high on them in the season before. But let's hear your thoughts on the loss Weber State.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump in first, though, since you were mentioning the Barnum firing from Portland State. Cal Poly also, after their win, let go of head coach Paul Wolf. So another coaching change here in the Big Sky as well. I was so high on NAU going into the season, and they find a way to let me down one final time as we go out of here. So they didn't just lose to Weber State. They kind of got just run out of the field there in that fourth quarter. Their final 5 drives, they had 1 touchdown, a pick, and 3-4 turnovers on downs. Weber State did a great job defensively of swallowing up any momentum that NAU tried to build through the end of that game. I know with about 7 minutes left, they scored. They cut it down to 13. They get a stop. You're thinking, okay, they can drive down again, make this a 1-score game, and then Weber State comes out and 4-and-outs them and score again, go back up 20. So, they came out there, played like the better team, and didn't let what's happened to them this season really hurt them in the long run. As for NAU, Pennington kind of struggled with his accuracy. He was 21-39. Colby Katzis, he impressed again out at receiver. He had 135 yards receiving. The running game for NAU was just non-existent. Pennington was their leading rusher. He had 18 yards on 11 carries. So they couldn't establish the run game last week. That was a kind of a big part of how they were able to keep it up against Cal Poly. So in the end, it is a loss that most definitely keeps them out of the playoffs. And, with how this team's played, they deserve to not be in the playoffs.
You're totally right, John. They definitely don't. They were projected to maybe make an appearance before the season, but they will not. Player to kind of pay attention to maybe next season is Kingston Tisdale, freshman quarterback for Weber State. At 277 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I think I'll keep my eyes out for him. But a disappointing end of the season for Northern Arizona, and a good win for Weber State after firing their coach a couple weeks ago and ending on a high note. It was a difficult season for the Wildcats, but going into the offseason makes things feel, I'm sure, a little bit better for the program, and they're going to be looking to build for the couple of years to come. Let's jump to the next game. Let's talk to Mark here about Idaho State and ending on a 4-game winning streak, and they defeat Idaho. And, I just wanted to point out, I saw Dason Brooks had 1,006 yards, I believe, this season, and he's the 8th player in program history to have 1,000 in a season. So shout out to him. But Mark, what was your takeaway in the Battle of the Domes?
Yeah, when's the last time you thought you'd hear Idaho State and 4-game winning streak in the same sentence? So good for them. I was not surprised that Idaho State won, but I was surprised that they handled Idaho as easily as they did. 27-0 at the half in Moscow. in a game you thought Idaho would want to finish strong, even though they had nothing to play for. They had played well the week before against Sac State, and thought that would continue, and especially at home, maybe go out a winner. But they went out with a dud. Joshua Wood gets hurt late in the first half and misses with a shoulder injury, got hit on a run and missed the second half. But I mean, by then the game was pretty much over. And I know their Sawyer Teeney comes in, throws it, leads them to a couple of touchdowns, but it didn't matter. I mean, Idaho State was well ahead. The game was over. So Idaho couldn't stop Idaho State. They couldn't stop their offense. Cook again can fling it all over the place, and their guys would get open. And a couple times he fooled them with like read option keepers, which apparently he hadn't done a whole lot of running this year, but he did in this, a few more times in this game, and kept Idaho off balance. It's going to be an interesting offseason in Pokey and Moscow. Pocatello with the guys they have that could come back. Do they come back? Won't even mention whether the coaching people coming back and stuff like that anymore. You can't, somebody gets hot and they're gone, so I haven't heard anything. But then you got Moscow, where Idaho's defensive line coach already went on Twitter last night and thanked people for his time in Moscow, so he's gone. There was the thing about their offensive coordinator, Matt Linehan, who was up in the press box most of the season and then down on the sidelines the last few games. And we'd ask Thomas Ford about, well, is he still the OC and he's still calling plays? And he would give you an answer that maybe made you shake your head more than you did before you asked the question. So we don't know what happened the last couple of games. So it's going to be an interesting offseason in Moscow as far as their coaching staff. Like I said, they already lost one guy, and who knows what other kind of shuffling will go on. And we'll also see what happens in the portal. So interesting game Saturday in Moscow.
Fritz, your thoughts on your Bengals ending the year hot?
My Bengals, yeah. Well, it looked like they told Dason Brooks, you're going to get a lot of carries today, so go find your half jersey and put it on. And I don't know, there used to be a rule, I thought, about wearing a full jersey, but he was out there showing his midriff the whole game and making plays. And saw a lot of good catches from Ian Duarte and Sion Nunnally. I thought their quarterback made some great throws, a couple of them when he wasn't able to get down on his left foot and really rotate into the throw. That was his first touchdown pass. And but I thought the play of the game was, or the catch of the game, was on that interception. They're up 17-0. Idaho's driving, and their kid Gabe Taylor just jumped right in front of that on the sideline and made a dynamite catch and kept them up 17-0. And then after that, it was kind of all Bengals, all of them, all my Bengals. So ugly loss to the Vandals. You look and all of a sudden they're 4-8. That really surprises me. Maybe a little bit of a hangover from the Sac State debacle last week. But it is cool to see Idaho State 5-3, on the upper division of the Big Sky Conference. And that hasn't happened since 2018 when they were 5-3. And the last thing is I'm not sure about that trophy. It's the 2-year-old Spud Trophy. What do they call it, Mark?
The Potato State Trophy.
The Potato State Trophy. The Battle of the Domes is now for the Potato State Trophy, and I think the Divide Trophy that the O-linemen have to lug around after the Griz game set the standard for only trophies, but they're trying. It seemed like Idaho and Idaho State should have maybe gone up from there instead of sideways, or maybe even backwards. So that's all I have to say about that.
Fritz's Bengals, they end 6-6, like you said, Fritz. They were one of the most fun teams I think this season. We didn't expect, kind of like Eastern. I think they may be a little bit better than Eastern with the way they weren't as injured throughout the year. But Idaho State was definitely one of the most fun teams, ending, like you said, 5-3 in the Big Sky. And Jordan Cook's a junior, so if he comes back for a senior year, I think that's another team we're talking about this summer. Is what are the expectations after exceeding where they should have been? And talk about not exceeding is, I believe Idaho was in the FCS projected to be top 13 when the season started, and to finish 4-8 and only 2-6 in the Big Sky, a very disappointing year for the Vandals. I'm very interested to see how they look next season, as they're going to want to be improving that record. And we'll see. They had a lot of players come back. So like Mark said, we'll see if the retention continues. We have one more game to finish up on. I'm going to go back to Jon here as UC Davis escapes Sacramento State and keeps future FBS powerhouse, the Hornets, out of the playoffs this year, which for Big Sky fans might put a little bit of smile on some people's faces, as they might not be going out of the conference in the nicest way to some people I've seen on Twitter, or X as it's called now. But how big of a win was this, Jon, for UC Davis going into the playoffs? You know, they're ranked a little bit higher than if they were to lose that game.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge when you look in the playoff seeding and they get the bye, that last bye spot. So that, you know, they drop this game and they're maybe fighting for a seed, let alone being in the byes. So as for, you know, the talk of trophies, I wonder what Fritz thinks about this one. It's a 20-pound chunk of I-80, which is the road that connects the two, the cities of Davis and Sacramento. That's what they play for in the Causeway Classic. So
that's good old-fashioned football, if you ask me.
Yeah, just playing for a chunk of concrete to take home. So no, I think it was a tale of two different Davis teams throughout this game, though. They came out strong and you know, put up 14 early points, and then they kind of die down in the middle and go down 27-17, and then they score the final 14 to take the win and make a big fourth down stand. They, you know, show on that last drive that the defense can still stand strong even without Rex Connors. They've you know, had some troubles against Montana State the last week, so to be able to kind of rebound and stop them when they needed to was good. Sacramento State relied on their strengths. They ran the ball 65 times. They threw the ball 9 times. So 326 yards on the ground. Cardell Williams was 3 of 9 passing, including the final play of the game was an incompletion that sealed it up for UC Davis. And yeah, just a huge win for them in terms of what it means for the future of this season for Davis, you know, getting to host in there and not having to go out and re-rack it up this week.
Right, yeah, getting that first round bye is huge, I think, for UC Davis. Fritz, I'll ask you here on this one. Did you have any paying attention to this game, or if it had any impact on you? Just want to hear your thoughts.
Well, you know, I was going to say we're gonna miss Sac State. You know, they've provided some Big Sky Conference memories. You know, there was Ricky Ray pitching a ball that Tony Parker picked off for the Griz and went to the house for a miraculous win in 2000 at Washington Grizzly Stadium. There was the PAM game. There was a monsoon in 2003. In 2004, Steve Mushagan was sitting in front of one of those heating tubes on the bench during a blowout loss at Montana. So in a way, I'm gonna miss those guys. So best of luck to them. I don't see the future being all that bright at the next level, but that's life in college football, I guess.
That is right, Fritz. And as we know, Glacier quarterback Jackson Presley is heading to Sac State, so I think we'll all keep our eyes definitely peeled to see how that goes for him. And you got to wish him the best of luck. You know, making that jump isn't going to be easy, and you know, it'd be great, you know, to see a Big Sky team go up to the next level and have success. Like you said, I don't think it'll be soon, but we will see and keep an eye on them. Mark, I just wanted to kind of ask for, you know, any last thoughts on the last week of the regular season before we talk playoffs.
Yeah, well, kind of like what Jon mentioned earlier, I was surprised to see Paul Wolf get fired at Cal Poly. I mean, they won their finale, you know, and I thought they were making progress the last 3 years, but apparently maybe there's stuff behind the scenes that it was time for him to go. But like I said, I thought he was making progress. Feel bad for Bruce Barnum. Was able to talk to him a few times at the Big Sky football kickoff, and he was always a lot of fun to talk to and entertaining, and seemed like he was good for the Big Sky. I mean, Portland State, you know, he didn't win there other than the 1 year, 2015. But I mean, Portland State doesn't support them. They make them play out in Hillsboro in a field out there. So, you know, maybe it's just as well. Maybe he hooks up with another school that's, you know, a little more attentive into football and stuff like that. That's 3 coaches in the Big Sky count Mickey Mental at Weber State, and who knows who else is moving on. We're hearing rumors out here of Vegan interviewing at Oregon State, so we'll see. I mean, I talked to him at the Big Sky football kickoff last year, and he was interested in the WSU job, but it didn't really work out because he was in the playoffs, and WSU kind of wanted to hire somebody quickly, and they ended up with Rogers and stuff like that. So anyway, it'll be an interesting off season, not only with the portal, but maybe with more of the head coaches in the league too.
Yeah, next year we might be seeing a total different Big Sky coming down, like you said, coaches, players, Vegan. I'm not sure. I think he has the opportunity to do it, and we're seeing the reports. I think Griz fans may welcome it, but also I've heard whispers on social media of Cho, if he leaves Nevada, going back to Montana State. So for Montana fans, I don't think there's a win-win yet. But for Montana State, I know they wouldn't want to see Vegan go. He's been a great coach for them and a lot of success. And if he were to go to Oregon State, I think they'd be very excited, as he's been a very proven coach in the Big Sky Conference. To wrap up our regular season, I'm just going to go really quick here and talk about how we did on picks this year. And I have to start with my guy, Jon. Jon is our winner this year. I give you a virtual high five and a trophy. And next year, I definitely want to make sure that we get something better for you. I'm going to think of some ideas in the off season of what we can do. But congratulations, 84% on the year, 77 out of 92. And Mike, new to the Big Sky this year, 73 out of 92, 80%. Congratulations on getting second place. Virtual trophy to you as well. But you started off a little bit low, and I got to give you respect. You start figuring out the conference and figuring out the games. So you can go home and celebrate and tell your family that you got second place in the picks.
Me and the cat are going to celebrate tonight.
There you go. There you go. And Fritz comes in third. 71 out of 92, 77% this season. Still did a great job. And Mark was right behind him. 70 picks out of 92, 76%. So both of you were very close this year. And I ended up last. I tried to make a jump in the end. Ended up getting the beginner's unluck. And basically, wasn't able to get ahead of anyone. I think I was in last place all year. So tough season for me. I know I got to be better next year, especially if we start doing some serious reward for these picks. And I'm glad I didn't wager on any of the games with my personal money, or I would be broke and have my pockets empty. So I'm gonna let Fritz here talk. Fritz, we're gonna talk FCS playoffs, the bracket, or anything else you wanted to mention still about last week. Go ahead. I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Oh, well, I agree with Mark. I'm starting to see Paul Wolf go too. I mean, you and your finale, and seems like it was performance-based on the last few seasons of Cal Poly. He should have been fine. And then, the coaching search, Vegan definitely interviewed. He was spotted in the Portland airport yesterday. And it's just too bad this stuff happens during the college season, because in the NFL, it really doesn't. And I can think of 08 and 09, Bobby Hawk was up for jobs, and I couldn't help then and can't help now thinking that it kind of affected the way things went. So, Cats have the week off. There's a couple of free days without practice. So, and just colleges seem to be in an awful hurry with this stuff, and I'm not sure why. Because I know there's a portal opening pretty soon, but it just seems like things could be just as well if they just waited a couple weeks till the playoffs were over. On to the seedings, I guess, right? I thought the Griz might drop farther, and because of Lehigh being unbeaten. And I was pleased that they didn't. I'm not sure about South Dakota State being waiting in the wings. It's either them or New Hampshire. Chase Mason's on the mend. With Chase Mason in the lineup, they started 7-0 and then he got hurt. But, if it wound up being South Dakota State with a healthy Chase Mason, they'd be playing the team that at full strength needed overtime to beat MSU, which beat U of M by 3. And it was a close game, and it was winnable by U of M. So, bring it on. And that's not to say New Hampshire couldn't rise up. Chip Kelly is out there unemployed. Maybe they can bring him back as OC and spring a surprise on the Jackrabbits.
Yeah, I know Montana fans are wanting some revenge for those South Dakota teams in the years past. They've been so talented this year. They've dealt with the injury at quarterback, obviously, and I think it'd be fun for that rematch to happen and for Montana to able to try and get over the hill of beating the Jackrabbits, because they've had their number recently. Jon, I know you've got – go ahead, Fritz.
Oh, I was going to say that's recently, but then if you go back into your history in 09 and 1993, there's just some ridiculous history between the Jackrabbits and Griz, and the 09 playoff game. They were up, I believe, 48-21 and lost 61-48. The Griz rallied and scored 40 straight. So a lot of good history there. Not all of it on the Jackrabbits side.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Fritz. I definitely think this one will have an impact based on, we've seen it in the past before, that success, and then now Jackrabbits last couple seasons. Jon, I know you have a ton of opinions when the bracket came out. Let's hear what you got.
Yeah, well, first off, kind of mentioned UC Davis earlier. I definitely think that this last game was big for them in getting into a bye. It's good to see that the Big Sky, all three teams getting end up in those top 8 seeds, so they all get that first week off. And it's good to see for them that no contest against Mercer all the way back in week 0 in August didn't really hurt them at the end of the day. A win would have been better for them in that, but I think a lot of people kind of forget that those two teams did meet, and it doesn't show on the record books. So both of them get into the top 8 seeds, so it's good to see that didn't hurt either squad there. Moving around with the 3, 4, and 5 seeds, kind of like Fritz mentioned, I'm happy Montana didn't drop. I definitely thought that them and Lehigh were going to be neck and neck in that same regard. I don't think that Lehigh should be 5. I think they should be 4. I'm not the biggest fan of Tarleton State. I've mentioned that with Fritz, but I think the thing that helped Montana out a ton was their Massey strength of schedule rating compared to Lehigh. Montana's strength of schedule is 25 and Lehigh's was down at 93. So that definitely helps them. Even though they had a weaker conference schedule in the Big Sky this year, it still was a very difficult schedule. So that South Dakota State game doesn't please me for Montana as well. If that does come to fruition in round 2, still a game to be played this week, but I feel like that's possibly the worst potential matchup that they could have gotten in that draw. Definitely, if Mason's healthy, it's a whole different South Dakota State team than we've seen the past 5 weeks. I know he was out warming up when they played North Dakota this past weekend, and in what we thought was going to be a winner in, loser out game, but they both end up getting in, so that's a whole different scenario there as well. Kind of touch on that as well here in a few seconds, but biggest thing for me that I think a team should be slighted, or think a team that was slighted, is Tennessee Tech. Former Eastern Eagle Kekoa Vesperis there at quarterback. They go unbeaten in the FCS. They only lose to SEC Kentucky, and they're the 13 seed. They can't even get into the top half of the seeds, let alone the top half of the next 8. So difficult situation for them. They definitely have more motivation now to go out and keep winning. Maybe a 3-point victory over UT Martin in this last week wasn't the most ideal selling point for them, but again, they're 10-1, 11-1. So good team there. Another team that I feel like got slighted is Monmouth, 9-3. They're left out. 7-5. North Dakota gets in, who I don't want to say North Dakota is not deserving, but Monmouth might be missing their quarterback, but they're still a very good team. They lost their last 2 regular season games. I don't know if that quarterback situation, maybe like a Florida State situation from a few years ago in the FBS playoffs, hurts them. But for them to not be in with a 4-loss New Hampshire and a 5-loss North Dakota ahead of them when they're 9-3 and have a win over Villanova, that's a very difficult situation for them to swallow.
Mark, how about your thoughts on any of the teams Jon said, or what was your reaction when you first saw the bracket? Anything pop out to you?
Wow. Obviously with Idaho not in it, and there wasn't quite as much interest out here, but you still, after following the playoffs the last few years, things still jump out. You mentioned, I wonder if Sacramento State would have got in if they'd won. They might not have got in even if they'd won. They might have looked at that last week's game, and they might have been 1 short anyway. It might not have mattered. UC Davis as an 8 seed. I wonder if they would have dropped into having to play this week if they had lost. Only there's only 3 Big Sky teams, and I think the last 3 or 4 or 5 years there have been 4 or 5 teams in. So I don't know how the Big Sky commissioner is going to spin it this year when he talks about how deep the Big Sky is at the national level, and they only got 3 teams in. Obviously Idaho was projected as 1, and they were disappointing and stuff like that. So just to see only 3, a good thing they're in the top 8. All got buys, but in the end there was only 3. I don't think Northern Arizona was going to get in even with a win either. I hadn't seen them projected in any of the mock, FCS mock bracketology, like ESPN does and stuff like that. Did notice obviously Montana and Montana State on the same side of the bracket, and we talked about that might see them again in 3 weeks. It's kind of interesting to see that 3 of the Dakota schools having to play on the first weekend. We're kind of used to North Dakota State's number 1, but we're kind of used to seeing the Big Sky and the Dakota schools kind of dominate the top 8 of the bracket, and we're starting to see a few other FCS schools nationwide kind of jumping into that upper echelon. So that's a little bit different and interesting this year. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Fritz, do you have anything else on the bracket that you saw?
Well, I certainly agree with Jon about Tennessee Tech. The last time the FCS committee put out their little top 10, they were in there like number 7, I think. So they didn't do anything, I didn't think, to make them drop all the way to number 13. And we haven't really talked about the Cats being number 2, and deservedly so. Caden Dallard keeps making plays, especially the last month. Paul Broad is banged up, but still chugging away on a great defensive line. That O-line and that defense give MSU a lot of staying power. And, I'd love to see a rematch, and I plan on being there for it if it happens, if and when. And it's tough to beat a team twice, so we'll see what happens. But, by then the Cats will be running a 12-game winning streak and having a lot of momentum. So we'll see what happens.
We will see what happens, Fritz. And like you said, Montana State is on fire after that South Dakota State game. They started rolling with momentum, and I have to give my hats off to Lamson. He has been more than impressive this year. I was kind of skeptical at first after watching, they had some tough games to start. And then when they started getting the Big Sky, he was a little bit more consistent. I think that Mercyhurst game kind of had me fall back a little bit as they weren't as productive. But what he did at Washington Grizzly Stadium was more than enough to show me that they are capable of winning, a national championship, or at least getting to the game again. North Dakota State's obviously still the favorite, betting wise, anyone wise. They're I think huge, like minus 300 is what I saw. So they're still projected to win, but I can see Montana State, Montana, pretty much those 3 making their case for again this year. As I would love to see a rematch and love to have Fritz there again to break down the game. Before we go here, guys, we have some Player of the Year discussion, and this week we'll find out who is the offensive Big Sky Player of the Year, defensive Player of the Year, and Coach of the Year. So I'm going to go to Mike first. Haven't heard from Mike in a second. Mike, let's hear your predictions on this last season.
Yeah, so I think for offensive player of the year, for me, I've really liked seeing and hearing about Ayat and just what he's been able to do for the Griz this year. His overall stats as well just look really, really impressive to me. Very productive. Defensive player of the year, I believe it's Mikey D'Amato. I think just overall has put together a strong season for Cal Poly, who you could say probably didn't have the best season that they were hoping for, but that he has certainly been a bright spot. I don't know if he'd quite win it, but I'd love to see Jalen Jenkins get some love. He really broke out this year for Eastern. A lot of passes, he top 5 in passes defended, tied for first in interceptions. Totally broke out this year in the absence of Deshaun Wells, who probably was getting more of the attention coming into the season. So good to see him shine. I would at least like to see him get some recognition of some kind. And then, yeah, I think for Coach of the Year, I just kind of went with who kind of did the best. And I think I'm going to go with Brent Vigen. Is it Vigen?
Vegan.
Brett
close.
Vigen for Coach of the Year. That'll just kind of be my pick. But yeah, those are guys I'm rolling with.
Thank you, Mike. Fritz, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, offense, it's really tough. It's tough to pick against Lamson or Ayat, but I think I'm going to go with Eli Gilman, the top rusher in the Big Sky. I don't know if Ayat has his 3,000 yards passing without Gilman bouncing things out. Of course, there's plenty of people say, maybe Gilman doesn't get those yards without the best quarterback play the Griz have seen in a few seasons. But I'm going to go with Eli Gilman. Defensively, this will surprise nobody because I've been on the bandwagon for a couple of weeks. Caden Dowler with the Bobcats. He's played so well this season, all season, but extremely well the last 3 weeks. So that's my pick there. And then for Coach of the Year, I was thinking Bobby for it would have been, I think, the 6th time, and twice since he's been back. I think you probably have to go with Vegan, but I would love to see Paul Wolf get it. But I think the pick is Vegan.
I'll just get mine out of the way right now because Fritz, you and I are exactly alike. I think Gilman, Dowler, and Vegan. I think that's how it's going to go. Ayat definitely was a toss-up. He's had a tremendous season with the passing yards, but the way Gilman's ran the ball this year, and especially against that Montana State defense, he showed that he was the real thing, and he hopefully comes back for another year for Montana fans. I believe he's a junior, so I think he has one more year. And then, how can you not pick Caden Dowler, especially winning the Big Sky? Pretty much made the play to win the Big Sky Conference, in my opinion. That changed the game, and he's had, 4 interceptions in the last 3 weeks and 2 pick sixes in the last 2 games. And then, you just got to go, kind of what Mike said, you got to go with what's best, and I think Vegan gets it again, and we'll see where that goes. I think that's an interesting decision. Let's go to Mark. Mark, what you got?
Well, I think just to go in a different direction, I wasn't totally sold on Defensive Player of the Year, but that Jacob, I don't know if it's Syke or PSYK from UC Davis, 9 sacks, 15 tackles for loss. Obviously, Dowler's very worthy of it. Offense, it's almost like the Griz kind of canceled each other out with their seasons. Gilman and Wortham and Ayat, stuff like that. Any of them could have done it. Gilman, I might have picked Gilman. He'd been a good offensive guy. Wortham was probably more of an all-purpose guy because of all the different things he does. But I'm going to go to Bozeman with Justin Lamson. He started slow, but they also played Oregon in the first game, and Oregon played pretty well in that game. So you're probably not going to look very good as a first year, or it's your first game against. You're playing Oregon, and 20 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, ran for 11. I think what Fritz said about Paul Wolf, that would have been funny for him to get Coach of the Year after he got fired, So, but I'm going to go with Vegan, probably just because almost by default. I mean, there wasn't anybody else that kind of quote unquote overachieved. Wolf might have been the closest to it, but him getting fired kind of maybe killed that. And the rest of them, Idaho was disappointing. Maybe Cody Hawkins gets a few votes and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting when that comes out on Wednesday.
It sure will be, Mark. Jon, our leader of the year picks. Sorry I made you go last, but I feel like after going first all the time, it's probably nice to hear everyone's picks, and then you get to decide. So let's hear what you got.
I know this is weird. I've heard everybody else. I was afraid that I was going to be picking the same as everybody else, but it's kind of nice to see the mix that we had compared to what we did in the preseason. Offensive Player of the Year. I thought it was down to more Ayat versus Lamson and just how this last week went. Gilman's also a very good shout though, and so I went with Lamson. Just solely based off of Cats get the win in Cat Griz. He's had a great season. He seems like he's gotten better throughout the year. So I feel like he's deserving, but I wouldn't be disappointed to see any of those 3 win it. Defensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go with Caden Dowler. I also think that he kind of sealed it up with how he played in the Cat Griz game, and that pick 6 just switched all momentum in that game. It looked like Montana was going to maybe have a chance to go up by 2 scores, and then he gives the Cats the lead back. And then actually, before I go to my Coach of the Year, I wanted to kind of say also, Mike, with that pick for Mike D'Amato, that's a good shout. The Cal Poly's got some good defenders on that team. I was looking at Julian Bernard this last week as well. He was he looked like a pretty good stud for them as well. So that Cal Poly defense has some good players. Kind of a dark horse pick there. And then Coach of the Year, I'm going to go with Bobby Hauck. think he or Vegan or Cody Hawkins. Yeah, there's a few guys in there that could definitely win it. I don't think there's a clear-cut guy who's overachieved, like Mark said. So I feel like Bobby's going to win it just personally. Montana's had a good season and rebounded.
And I'll give the floor here to Fritz before we hit our outro. Fritz, anything to say about hearing those picks?
Well, what Mark said about overachieving, we kind of tend to forget 12 games of the season that Bobby Houck had, and his staff had to replace every starter on defense. So I know they had a schedule that looked pretty nice. I think it turned out to be a tougher schedule than anybody thought it was going to be. So props to Bobby Houck and the Griz. And I should have mentioned Cody Hawkins as well, because he's done a bang up job. And like you said, Luke, I think that's the best offense to watch in the Big Sky. They're fun.
They definitely are fun, but that is all the time we have today, guys. Thank you for doing all your research. My panel's been great this season, and covering the regular season with you guys has been a blast. But we will catch you guys next week as we will discuss some first-round results and some second-round matchups for the FCS playoffs. I'm excited to get into that. But for now, that'll do it. Please share the video, comment any predictions you have on who you think's going to be a national champion or who anyone's going to face in the second round. But that's all we have. So thank you for tuning in this week to Big Sky Now, and we will catch you next time.
M&C Tire in Kalispell has been locally owned since 1979. From urban avenues to untamed trails, M&C Tire will help you conquer any terrain. Unleash the power within your ride. Stop into M&C Tire at 1271 North Meridian Road in Kalispell or mnctire.com. M&C Tire, wherever you go, we've got you covered.